This is where the collision happens, and they're pushing ahead with it, despite the revelations. There's still more than a dozen people in Canada under duty to warn protocols from the RCMP because they're in danger.
Yeah, this is outrageous.
Never say never. I never thought I would agree with Elizabeth May, and yet here we are. I'm Jasmine Lane. This is Over Opinionated. Subscribe, follow, share this video, comment your thoughts down below. And Donald Trump, he has landed in Canada for the G7 meetings, apparently having a conversation with Mark Carney later today. However, he did utilize his first address in Canada to remind the Canadian government and elbows up who he is. And worse was the absolutely pathetic response body language of our Canadian officials. I almost don't have words for it, but if I didn't have words for it, then we wouldn't have all that and more coming up today on Over Opinionated.
The G7 used to be the G8. Barack Obama and a person named Trudeau didn't want to have Russia in. And I would say that was a mistake, because I think you wouldn't have a war right now if you had Russia in. And you wouldn't have a war right now if Trump were president 4 years ago. But it didn't work out that way. But it used to be the G8, and now it's, I guess, what's that, 8 years ago, it switched over. They threw Russia out, which I claimed was a very big mistake. Even though I wasn't in politics then, I was very loud about it. It was a mistake in that you spend so much time talking about Russia, and he's no longer at the table. So it makes life more complicated. But you wouldn't have had the war.
Donald Trump came out swinging today. Initially, he talked about Iran, he talked about Israel, he talked about Ukraine, he talked about Russia, and he talked about the absolute incompetence of the Canadian government, which is fascinating, right in front of Mark Carney's face. Elbows up, everybody. Yeah, that's a real strong leader. Haha. Note how nobody talks like that to Donald Trump's face. Just an observation.
To begin Ukraine and assisting Ukraine in its time of need with military and economic aid since February 2022 has been one of our government's top priorities, and that will not change. That is the reason that we have invited President Zelenskyy to this summit.
Whether you like it or not, President Zelenskyy was given a seat at the table at the G7, despite not even being a G7 member, and despite Russia being kicked out, which you would think could almost add some more fuel to the fire. And there is a lot of opinions about this. Take a listen to this one.
Similarly, with Mr. Zelenskyy in Alberta, there is going to be a lot of pressure for world leaders to turn their attention back to the Ukraine. The challenging is, of course, there is only so much space on the agenda, and all of the bilateral meetings that will be attempting to be scheduled are going to take up a lot of the leaders' time.
Given the circumstances that governments in the G7 have decided to take this really hard stance on, having Zelenskyy at the G7 summit this year is not the wildest thing. It's insane, and it's also very strategic. And I'm going to just try to give you the most well-rounded version of all of this and then give you my opinions afterwards. But, you know, in all fairness, the war in Ukraine has actually affected a lot, self-imposed in terms of defense budgets, in terms of money donated. The G7 countries, Canada, US, Germany, France, Italy, Japan, and the UK have poured hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayer money, of course, into supporting Ukraine. So having Zelenskyy there is not super random. I think it's symbolic more than anything else. And I think that he's also there to keep the West unified and to push for more money, to push for more weapons, and to make sure that Ukraine stays a very top priority in the media cycle. And that would be strategy, right?
As you mentioned Putin, do you think that he should have a seat at the G7 today, that it should be the G8?
I'm not saying he should at this point, because too much water's gone over the dam, maybe. But it was a big mistake. Obama didn't want him, and the head of your country, the proud head of your country, didn't want him. This was a big mistake. You wouldn't have that war. You know, you have your enemy at the table. Even I don't even consider him. He wasn't really an enemy at that time. There was no concept. If I were president, this war would have never happened. But likewise, if he were a member of what was called the G8 at that time, it was always the G8, you wouldn't have a war right now.
Why not?
Donald Trump is probably the only person that is actually asking the obvious questions, which is, why is Ukraine your top priority when your own countries are falling apart, especially given the backdrop that Ukraine isn't a G7 nation. Does that mean that we should just absolutely abandon everybody who isn't? No, that's stupid. But, you know, enough is enough at some point, you would think, with most people. And it's really weird to me how funding for Ukraine is still going on. Clearly, more money isn't helping. So what is the next step? In Donald Trump's eyes, let's negotiate something here, which he has been actively doing. He is the only one actively doing that. And it's really bizarre to me that Canada's economy is tanking. Our housing is unaffordable. Our food prices are out of control. Unemployment is just climbing every single freaking month. Alberta is being ignored, and they're done being ignored. The French are also in election chaos right now. The US is exploding politically. Germany's economy is shrinking. Japan is aging into extinction. And the UK is like, what the hell is even going on in this place? It is absurd what has happened in the UK for so many years. And then still, the priority for this G7 is to have Zelenskyy at center stage. Ukraine is the headline, not your bills, not the economy, not trade, not failing infrastructure, not anything else that the G7 meetings are typically supposed to be sorting out and working through. Even if you understand the strategy behind having Zelenskyy there, it's really, really bizarre. Zelenskyy lobbies for more war funding, and Canadians are told that we have to downsize into modular homes so that we can pay for it. The G7 talks about freedom and sovereignty, but our own governments are sitting here censoring speech, ignoring inflation, pushing economic policies that nobody voted for, and this insane ideology that at least half the country rejects in its entirety. And it really does slap every single real national priority in the face. If you feel like your voice is being absolutely drowned out by global agendas that have nothing to do with you or your life or your country or your future, you are not crazy. You are just paying attention to what is going on here.
Fred, what keeps coming out from the government is that they don't want diaspora politics to sort of dominate foreign policy or influence the way they felt it did before. But I'm not making the argument. I'm just helping with the transition.
It's a terrible argument.
Well, yeah, I mean, we have not heard it from the Prime Minister directly. I would like to hear what he says about it, but like this is what you're hearing, you know, when you're talking to people about it. But you know, we had the World Sick Organization on the show yesterday. They had a press conference in Ottawa. We learned a lot about, you know, the situation from Global News with Mel's friend and former boss Jagmeet Singh under very close surveillance by an agent of India with connections to a crime gang. I mean, this is where the collision happens, and they're pushing ahead with it despite the revelations. There's still more than a dozen people in Canada under duty to warn protocols from the RCMP because they're in danger.
Yeah, this is outrageous. This is we talk about sovereignty in our country. Mm-hmm. We have, our authorities in our country have accused a foreign country of being involved in the murder of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil. What does sovereignty mean if we're not going to enforce our own rules here? To me, it's outrageous that he was invited. The more and more I think about this, the more I read about Jagmeet Singh this week being under surveillance by the government. The
agents of the government.
Agents
to
of
be
the
clear.
government.
Yeah.
For 18 months. Like, it's absurd. And I think it's a bad signal. I understand we need new trading partners. I understand we need to do this. But where do our values and our beliefs go in all of this conversation? How do we just open up like this? We didn't invite Premier Singh here.
Again, it's not uncommon for other leaders to be invited to the G7. However, there's some weird decisions with this one that make absolutely no sense, that totally contradict what you say you're doing, what you say your values are, and to really highlight the absolute destruction and removal of what was once the Canadian identity that we all grew up with. There is a Khalistani convoy on its way to Alberta because they plan to ambush Indian Prime Minister Modi. These people are here as either citizens, refugee claims, or are here on work visas or permanent residencies. But hey, elbows up, everybody.
G7 is nothing without U.S. leadership, and your personal leadership of the United States, many issues, geopolitics, economic, technology, and working hand in hand with the United States, Canada and the United States and the other G7 partners with your leadership. Very much looking forward to the meeting and grateful to have you.
Thank you very much, Mark. I appreciate it, and we've developed a very good relationship, and we're going to be talking about trade and many other things. And we have a whole group of people, some traders and some other people. I see my top economy people. But we have a very talented group of people, and you do too, and I know they work together very well. I look forward to that.
And what about those tariffs, right? Donald Trump said that they are going to be talking about trade, but when asked directly about tariffs, here's what Donald Trump had to say.
What is holding up a deal with Canada from your perspective?
It's not so much holding up. I think we have different concepts. I have a tariff concept, and Mark has a different concept, which is something that some people like. But we're going to see if we can get to the bottom of it today. I'm a tariff person. I've always been a tariff. It's simple, it's easy, it's precise, and it just goes very quickly. And I think Mark has a more complex idea, but also very good. So we're going to look at both, and we're going to see what we're going to come out with something, hopefully.
You almost want to feel a little bit bad about all of the liberal voters who, instead of just listening to you, reading data, doing research, to learn what conservatives were saying all along, which is that Mark Carney is a fraud and he is a liar. And that he wasn't a good vote for those reasons alone, but they chose not to believe you at all. Nope, they wanted to keep listening to the CBC because I'm a liberal, because I'm a good person, and I'm a good person because I'm a liberal. And that is as deep as it gets. But really, this government to me is just nothing but incompetence. And when it comes to incompetence, there is nothing scarier than that mixed with a lot of unchecked power.
Leader, in his well-known book, The Peter Principle, Lawrence J. Peter observed that in bureaucracies, individuals are often promoted to their level of incompetence. They perform well at one level only to be elevated into roles they can no longer manage effectively. In recent weeks, several of Prime Minister Carney's cabinet ministers have made remarks that raise serious doubts about their grasp of their responsibilities. Whether it's the public safety minister's confusion over firearms regulation, his need to recuse himself from discussions on two terrorist groups, the housing minister downplaying the need for lower home prices, or the culture minister contradicting the prime minister on pipelines. These incidents point to troubling misalignment or a lack of understanding at the highest level of government. So, Senator Gold, is the Prime Minister confident that his ministers possess the competence required for the positions they hold, or are we witnessing the Peter Principle in action?
Under the Peter Principle, it really does explain why so many businesses are unbelievably poorly run, because over time, you end up with managers and leaders who aren't good at their jobs at all, but they were promoted to those new high-ranking positions based on past success, not a good fit for the position. And that is how a lot of organizations work, I would argue. I'm sure you would agree with that.
It's my understanding that the Prime Minister has confidence in the cabinet that he is named and has confidence that they will work together to implement the priorities that he has set for this government.
Senator Gold, Canadians deserve ministers who are aligned with the government's directions and capable of delivering on their mandates. And of course, we're all hopeful that Prime Minister Carney is able to succeed on the targets that he has set. When ministers consistently, though, make statements that mislead the public or contradict the Prime Minister and government policy, public confidence, of course, becomes eroded.
If you haven't already, because I did post it a little bit later, I highly encourage you to watch yesterday's episode. It may have been the most important and information-filled episode of all time that will definitely underlie, I would assume, pretty much everything that we talk about from here on out, not just in Canada, but in other nations as well. And the discussions of yesterday's show definitely lead me into this right here. I'll also pin the link for that episode in the top comment just to make it easier for you. But Elizabeth May has actually said something that I completely agree with for possibly the first time ever about the unchecked power and incompetence of this government.
Trampling on parliamentary democracy does nothing for unemployed workers. Bulldozing through democratic process does nothing to build our economy. C5 and the programming motion together represent a new low represent, or perhaps a new height in contempt for Parliament itself. And in my years observing closely Parliament, I've never seen a time when a Prime Minister's office or a government grabs onto itself new powers that it has relinquished them later. The idea that this bill will be done and dusted by Friday must be resisted, and as an effort to make sure the Prime Minister understands, we will sit through the summer. There is no objection that I've heard from any member of Parliament or any party to the idea that we need proper study. Witnesses can come forward in the summer. What is the rush to pass bad legislation that will lead to court challenges and which well could deliver this power to this future cabinet in the hands of a different Prime Minister? I urge Prime Minister Carney and his cabinet to think it through. Stop the programming motion and let the bill be studied.
But guys, we're the Liberal Party. That means that we can totally bypass Parliament and do things without votes and evade every single question. We can do anything because we're liberals, which means it's okay if we have unchecked power and that we do things that if any other party did it, particularly the Conservatives, we would be screaming and protesting over it because, oh my gosh, you're a fascist dictatorship if you were to do something like that. But if we do it, it's okay because it's for your safety. It's for the betterment of our country. Give me a break already. So Elizabeth May is discussing the One Canadian Economy Act, Bill C-5, which, while it is supposed to bring free trade and labor mobility in Canada, as well as the national interest projects, which of course aren't actually of national interest, they're only of ideological interest, as clearly outlined by Mark Carney and his ministers, it is raising some serious alarm bells because it fast tracks approvals with minimal scrutiny. So all projects labeled as national interest, which again are ideological interest or just what Mark Carney chooses he's going to spend your money on, which he may or may not profit from, or his friends and lobbyists may or may not profit from in the long term. It skips all of the detailed regulatory measures, evaluations, environmental evaluations as well. And so that means that without any approval votes, anything like that, you could have massive spending, massive projects made without any substance to them, really, without people even really knowing what they are. And Eco-Justice has actually warned that it could silence communities, sideline science, and undermine the law because it grants sweeping exemptions at Mark Carney's cabinet's discretion. Yeah, wow. Alrighty there. It also completely erodes parliamentary oversight. Elizabeth May is very correct there because Parliament only has 1 week to debate and vote, which, as she said, is a new low, and it's worse than any omnibus bill that she has seen up until this point, and it centralizes power in cabinet, reducing public and legislative input. It also asserts Indigenous consultation, but does not guarantee free, prior, and informed consent as required under Section 35 of the Constitution. And it gives Cabinet ability to override protections without proper Indigenous agreement and also without proper consultations with literally anybody other than themselves. And for that reason, it undermines democracy and environmental protections that currently exist. So there's been critics, which include First Nations leaders, lawyers, things like that, that are saying that there's key safeguards that are now being overwritten, similar to the Impact Assessment Act, which in many cases has actually delayed a lot of things, and that projects could proceed even if they cause environmental harm that laws currently prohibit. And all I really have to say to this is, I told you so. We all told everybody who called us names. We told them. We told all of them. We screamed it from the rooftops. We provided examples and data and receipts, and they ignored us. And this is the consequences of having a technocratic neoliberal government with unchecked power, who is, by all accounts, actually a fascist government. That is something that we discussed in yesterday's episode, if you want to give that a listen, as I said earlier. And I think that we are in some very dangerous territory here. This is not good at all. This is very authoritarian. This is a downward slope. And we have to do everything in our power to use our voices as loud as humanly possible to ensure that this does not get passed on Friday, which is when the Liberals want. And as Elizabeth May points out as well, no parties are opposing to sitting through the summer to figure this one out. It is only the Liberal government that is refusing to sit through the summer to work this one out. And why would they be refusing that? Just think about that. Why? If everybody else is on board, why are they refusing it? The probability of it being because they don't care and they're going to pass this and they have the Governor General on their side to ensure that every single thing that they want to happen happens is quite high, in my opinion. I'm Jasmine Lane. This is Over Opinionated. Be sure to subscribe, follow, like, share the video, comment your thoughts down below. All of those things help us compete against the mainstream media, which is why, I would argue, a very big reason why we are in the current state that we are in this country, as unfortunate as it is. So all of your support just means the absolute world, and it really, truly does help a lot. So thank you endlessly. And I'll be back with you tomorrow talking a little bit more about some other G7 stuff that we didn't get a chance to get to today, among many other things. And I hope you have a beautiful day.